Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. It is a sweltering Tuesday here in the New York area yet again, but I'm very excited to be with all of you today for another episode of the event Hustlers. In case you don't know, my name is Liz King Caruso, and I'm the founder of Liz King Events and several other projects. And I'm really excited to chat today with Ellen Hockley Harrison, who is with Greater Good Events. Ellen, you and I have known each other for many years, and I'm very excited to have people get to know a little bit more about you. I think the best conversation we had, like the first conversation I remember, is at a Bizzabo meetup. I had known of you for quite a while before that. That was like the first time we actually got to chat, and I got to really know what you do. So I'm excited for everyone to meet you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm pretty excited to chat with you.
So was that our first conversation, or is that like deep conversation, meaning more than hi, bye?
Probably. Yeah. That must have been 4 years. I don't know how many years ago that was.
It was a while. And look where you are now.
I know. Look where we both are now.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell people a little bit more about your career and Greater Good Events?
Absolutely. So, hi, everybody. I'm Ellen, as Liz mentioned. I run Greater Good Events. We're also based here in the New York area. But we also have a branch in the Pacific Northwest in Portland, Oregon. A little bit about what we do. So we are a boutique event planning company. We work predominantly with wedding clients or nonprofit clients, and we do it all with sort of a focus on eco and socially conscious events. Now, obviously, that can mean a lot of different things. We do it in a lot of different ways, and we do it in any way that sort of works for the client and makes them comfortable. We work with food and flower rescue companies. We do some of our events are plastic free. We do composting at some of our events. It's really a super, super broad range of how we can kind of incorporate all of those ideas into the event planning space. But the goal is really to sort of help people understand that you can still create these really, really incredible, amazing, large-scale events while still sort of thinking consciously and mindfully about the environment, as well as like just our general world, and how that's going to sort of further on affect everything that we do.
So how did you get into that niche? Obviously, I would imagine there's a lot of personal passion around that. But how did that come up? Is it something you purposely did? Is it something you kind of fell into? How does that parallel with your real life?
Yeah, so it's totally something that I purposefully did. When I founded the business, that was just always the mission. But it really came about because I started working in the food industry actually as a teenager. And one of the first really large events that I worked on was a music festival in Portland, Oregon. And it was a benefit for the Oregon Food Bank. And I worked for this catering company that provided food for all the VIPs, as well as ran some additional booths for just general admission. And at the end of my last day, my first year, I was 18 years old. And I said to one of the chefs, what's going to happen with this entire walk-in full of food that we have left? And he sort of looked at me and like shrugged. It's like, I don't know. I guess we throw it out. And I was like, we just spent 4 days working our butts off to raise money for the Oregon Food Bank, and we're going to throw out the leftover food? Like, that sounds a little backwards to me. And that was kind of the end of the conversation. And the next morning, I got a phone call from this chef, and he's like, where are you? It's like 7:30 in the morning. Like, I'm in bed. Like, I've been working the last 4 days. Like, I'm in bed. And he's like, great. How fast can you be down here? I don't know, 15 minutes. So I get in my car and I race down to where the festival was. And he says, don't tell anybody, but we're going to fill your car with as much food as we can. And I want you to find a place to donate it. And I was like, okay, great. So that's what we did. And at the time I drove like a super old Toyota Camry. So it was essentially a boat. And we must have put 500-600 pounds of food in my car. And I dropped it off at local shelters throughout the city. And we did that for 4 or 5 summers before the Oregon Food Bank was like, oh, this is a great idea. We should do this from all of our vendors. And so they sort of picked it up. And by that point, I graduated from college and I'd moved out and was living in other places and still sort of working on this kind of like give back, like let's not waste all this food. I used to, in college, I donated a lot of wedding cake because any of you wedding planners out there probably know that a lot of clients order far too much wedding cake. They think their guests are going to eat a lot of it, and they really don't. And so I went on to grad school, totally unrelated. I moved to New York and started working in the event space and sort of reignited that passion for this waste. And I started trying to figure out different ways to really reduce waste at events. And the companies and organizations that I was working for just weren't really on board with it. So I leapt out on my own and started doing that in my own space. It sounds great. It's a lot harder than it sounds. It doesn't usually cost more, but you have to sort of just be a little bit more thoughtful about like where you're spending and like, oh, instead of doing $25,000 of flowers, let's do $20,000 of flowers and spend $5,000 on a rescue company. It's just about sort of rearranging how you view what you're going to do. It totally bleeds over into my personal life. My husband and I compost. Yesterday, no exaggeration, I spent a half an hour in my front yard going through our recycling bin because our cleaning lady has been doing our recycling wrong. So it's just, it's something that I am super passionate about.
Waste is a huge issue in our industry, but it seems like when you're talking about, you put X towards flowers and X towards a rescue company, they don't, it's not, like you said, it's not an easy thing to do to just, waste less and repurpose. I know around food, I only know a little bit about it based on what I've tried to teach myself basically. And also my mom owned a bakery.
Ooh,
So I
yeah.
know that there are a lot of legalities around what, like you might have tons of food, but you can't just give it out to whoever you feel like,
Yeah.
especially when you're a business or an organization. So I like you said, there's a lot of rules around that. So I'm sure we don't have time to get into all that. But what are some of the things you've learned that planners should know about limiting waste? Some best practices.
Yeah, for sure. So some of the really good things that I try to be mindful of in that regard is food that's been put out already cannot be repurposed. It cannot be given out. I mean, you can give it to your staff. A lot of catering companies do that. So like if there's leftover food, then the staff can get first dibs, and that will significantly reduce the amount of waste. But making sure, so this sounds super weird, and I know a lot of you event planners are like, oh my God, she's crazy. But a buffet, for example, not every chafing dish needs to be overflowing. So putting enough in there so that guests can get it and then refilling mindfully. So instead of every single tray that gets brought out, like having it overflowing, making sure that they're like a little less than full. So that way, overall, people still get to eat the same amount of food, but there might be an extra chafing dish in the back that's still in the oven or still in the refrigerator, and that can be donated because that was never served. And so just sort of thinking critically, talking to the caterers about it. A lot of caterers these days, because costs are constantly rising, are also starting to be more mindful about it. Another way, and this doesn't necessarily reduce waste per se, but it does reduce what's going to the landfill, is partnering with composting companies. And all food products can be composted, even like if you're using paper goods, as long as they don't have like a plastic coating on them, they can also all be composted. That said, compostable silverware isn't really compostable.
No, don't say it. Don't ruin my.
I know. I'm sorry. So the compostable silverware needs to be composted a special way. You can't just put it in your like backyard compost. Whereas like the paper plates that we occasionally use for events in my house, those can just go straight into my backyard compost. So that's kind of like where it starts. I mean, I know, again, that's overwhelming. There are rules, especially I'm really crazy about fish. Like, I never, ever, ever give out fish because that's like the first thing to go bad.
Yeah.
And that sucks. But, grains, vegetables, fruit, even a lot of meats are super easy, and most places are so excited to help them, not help them, accept them, to
Yeah.
help people. So that's usually kind of where I start.
We have to have a whole offline conversation about personal composting. It's like something I would love to do more of. And I remember my grandmother always composted, but then she would like, break it down and put it into her garden.
Yep.
And we don't have that much property. So the only thing I keep thinking about is the smell. It's like one of those things I want to do it, but I know there has to be like a way to do it. I've been doing so much
There,
research
there
on
are
it.
some really great ways. As a really, really quick note, I don't know if they operate by you. Actually, they probably should. They're New York based. Right now, because we also don't have a ton of property and we have a dog and we have some skunk issues in our neighborhood, we don't compost technically in our yard. I get like a bucket every Monday, and this company comes and picks it up. And I don't have to like worry about attracting critters or rodents. They do it for a ton of apartment complexes. It's a really great way for just like the general public to get into composting.
Oh, interesting.
Um,
I have to
I can
check.
send you a link offline.
Okay, thank you. Also, you should put the link in the chat, like in
Oh,
the
yeah,
video, in case other people want to know.
I'll put that.
Now, I do want to talk a little bit more about your career and kind of go back to something that you glossed over very quickly, which is that you said you left the Portland area and went to grad school totally unrelated and then
Mhm.
joined the events industry.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how, I mean, you talked about starting your own company and how that kind of happened, but why the events industry and what
Mm.
else did you think you'd want to do?
So I have a master's in political science and security studies.
Ooh, fancy.
Yeah, very cool. Totally unrelated to events. I thought I wanted to go into the foreign service. I love traveling. I wanted to really explore. For many years, I moved somewhere different every year.
Mhm.
And that made me really excited. And then after I finished graduate school, and I was in my later 20s, and I was like, I, I want to get married. I want to start a family at some point. I want to like set down roots. And so I realized that the foreign service was not going to be the right role for me long term. And I moved to New York. I was actually living in Tel Aviv in Israel. I moved to New York because I wasn't ready to like make the leap all the way back to Portland. I love my family, but my father runs a real estate business and had been trying to get me to come home and run the business with him pretty much since I left for college. Um, and I was like, I don't want to do that. I love you, but this isn't, I don't want to live the life that you and mom lived. I
Mhm.
want to do something different. Um, so at the time, my best friend was moving to New York for grad school, and I was like, New York could be fun. Let's try that. And so I moved to New York, and the first job I got in the city was actually the events manager for a synagogue in Brooklyn. So I had many, many, many years of events, food service, catering, and so waitressing. And so it was a really natural shift for me. And I worked there for a while. The synagogue itself was going through a lot of like really intense financial trouble, and I was like, I don't want to be part of this. So I left that job and moved to a nonprofit organization in the city and was their director of community events.
Okay.
And they were essentially a startup nonprofit. They had a fairly large endowment. My annual budget for events for a nonprofit was like almost $1 million, which is a lot for a startup nonprofit.
Mhm.
Um, and it was a really, really interesting job. But because we were a startup, I ended up running like 3 different departments that I did not have proper training for. And and I really struggled. I really, really hated the other things that I was managing. And I mean, I was essentially running an after school program also, and I have zero early childhood education experience. Um, and I
Startup
mean,
life.
it wasn't exciting, it wasn't fun, it was just terrifying, and I came home and cried pretty much every day. And um, so from there, I sort of made the shift. I was like, I still want to be doing events. I still love events. But I was also, because we had this massive budget, my superior was like, just spend all the money, buy all the things. And I was like, but I really think that we can do this like thoughtfully and mindfully. And she was like, I don't care, just do it, what needs to be done. And so that was really, really difficult for me. So I took sort of those experiences in New York and folded them into the growth of my business. That said, I was actually unemployed for a while. And my business was started because a good friend sat me down one day and she was like, I think you should do this. I was volunteering, I was running events just for free. And she was like, I think you should do this. And I sort of looked at her and I was like, you're nuts. And she was like, no, no, I think that this is the thing for you. And I was
Yeah.
like, nobody's going to pay me to do this. And that was like the 1st of May. And 4 weeks later, I, like, after a lot of like toil in my brain, I sat down with my then fiance, now husband, and was like, I have this crazy idea. Tell me what you think about it. And I gave him the idea of my business. We happened to be visiting my parents. I gave them the idea of the business. And like 3 weeks later, I had an LLC and my first investment from some family members to jumpstart the business. And here we are, 4 years, 4+ years later. And I can't even tell you how many events we've done. And it's been a journey. I mean, trying to convince people that like an eco-friendly or socially conscious event doesn't sound as scary as it is hard. And once you get into it, people are like, oh, this is so cool. Why didn't I know about this? I'm like, well, I don't know, because we're small. Because we haven't taken over the world yet. But yeah, so that's how we ended up, I guess, starting and where we are and in the industry.
So this topic of, socially conscious events and eco-conscious events is something that you have learned a lot about. And like you said, you're trying to educate the
Right.
consumers about. I'm
Right.
a huge believer in building your thought leadership and kind of sharing all the stuff that you know and using that to open doors for new clients. And it seems like you've had really good success doing that. I see some of your weddings all of your weddings I see look amazing and beautiful. And I, the eco-conscious and stuff like that is something I know about you from your brand. It's not,
Right.
and I maybe from the kinds of it's not something you see in the pictures, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But it's definitely something that you live and breathe, not only personally, but professionally. And I
Mhm.
heard you're launching something new around this space that I think is really amazing for your brand. Do you want to tell people?
Yeah. So I'm working with 2 other women in the event space to launch something called the Good Green. And the name means a lot of different things, but the idea is that it's a space for event vendors who are already sort of like interested in this like eco and socially conscious space, to learn more, but also for people who aren't necessarily familiar with it. So right now we've started with a 5-part webinar series. The idea is that as we grow to do in-person workshops and then hopefully some sort of basically something kind of like this format, but with like an eco-conscious and socially conscious sort of spin on all of our interviews and webinars. Eventually, our like long-term goal. So if anybody wants to donate any like development services, I'm all about that. We're hoping to develop a directory. So envision something that's similar to like the Knot or Wedding Wire or any of those like event directories. For now, it's definitely geared more towards the wedding side,
Mhm.
but something that's a little bit more user friendly, that's easily searchable, and where all of the vendors, there's some sort of pardon me, there's some sort of determination of like what it is that they do. So in this socially conscious space, one of the things that we're talking about isn't just like being eco-friendly, which is amazing because we have to save our planet,
Sure.
but also working with companies, for example, that hire refugees or new immigrants or formerly incarcerated people or businesses that are LGBTQ run or women run. So these are all sort of like under that same sort of socially conscious heading. And so we're working on developing all of these things right now. We have our second webinar next Tuesday. I have to find the link, but I can pop it in there. And it's really exciting. I think it'll be a really, really great way to reach a lot of different people who might not even know that the business that they're doing is different or special or interesting, because to them, sort of like what I do with the eco-conscious work, to them it's just a way of being. It's a way of
Yeah.
life. Um, so yeah, so that's what we're working on.
That's exciting.
Mhm.
And I know with, finding your niche and sometimes just it's not necessarily that you market yourself as, X, Y, or Z, all these
Right.
different titles, but that is just how you operate. And it's nice that I think a lot of people don't realize that that's a marketing angle.
Yeah.
You're talking about how the fact that this is really important to me and it therefore separates me from the competition. And you do it very outwardly in your branding. Greater
Right.
Good of Peace as a name is,
Right.
it gets you thinking about a particular thing.
Right.
But there are so many great companies in our industry who are focused on all different aspects of
Mhm.
sustainability and also socially conscious topics. And again, it's not necessarily how they've branded their whole business, but it's absolutely a marketing
Right.
arm for them.
Well, and sometimes it's just about a piece of their business too. So we recently joined, I'm sure you're all familiar with the brand Patagonia. The founder of Patagonia started a foundation called 1% for the Planet. You see it on like all sorts of branding for lots of different companies. So we, for example, just joined the 1% for the Planet, which means 1% of our annual profits go to some something related to the environment. We just joined, so we haven't made our annual donation for 2019 yet. So I don't know where it's going to go, but even for us, little things like for every wedding that we do, we donate 2 trees in honor of the couple. And then at the end of the year, in addition to this 1% for the Planet, we always do an annual donation to either a homeless shelter or a women's shelter in our area, because those are really important. They're just important topics for us.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's about sort of like, for me, it's all just about being mindful about my business and the work that I do. I want to know that I'm making an impact. And sometimes in this industry, it doesn't feel that way. And so this is one of the ways that I really feel like we're able to sort of make an impact and choose to use our voice, the voice that we have, to work on that and to really represent that space.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to spend $250,000 on a wedding, it's okay for us to make a donation in your honor for $1,000.
Right. Right. Now, one of the questions that I ask, I feel like every guest, it should be just like a standard question at this point, is obviously through running your business, you're able to express your values. And again, like you were just talking about, get that reward feeling. But I know one of the big things for you is travel. You mentioned that briefly, and I've seen you and your husband travel all over the world.
Yep.
Do you feel like your business is currently giving you the lifestyle that you want? And I think that's an ebb and flow.
Huh.
Right before we came on, you were talking about how you have vacation coming up, and that's quite a balancing act for any entrepreneur.
Yep.
Um, but does it work for you? Running a business allows you to do the things that you love to do personally, or you're getting there still, which is totally fine.
Well, yes, for the most part, it does. As Liz mentioned before we hopped on, I'm supposed to go on vacation next week, and I'm feeling very stressed about it. Partially because we've had a shift in some of our staffing. Um, but I feel really, really blessed actually to be able to take advantage of travel. Um, this year we haven't gone anywhere crazy, but last year we took 3 international trips. So, and that was mostly just because we felt, I mean, one of them was for work. I planned a wedding in Scotland, which was epic. And anybody want to get married in Scotland, I'm your gal. I will totally do that any day. But I do. I feel really blessed to be able to, for the most part, take advantage of going on vacation. The thing about that is, it took me a long time to get there. My first couple years, we traveled, but my computer always came with me. I checked my email every day.
Yeah.
I definitely didn't feel like I was on vacation. Um, Now I definitely have been able to disconnect and go away, um, which is still hard. I mean, you have to prepare for it and you can't just like pick up and leave. I mean, you can, but you shouldn't. Um, I definitely find so my husband and I had actually planned to spend 3 weeks in Africa this summer, and I I tore my ACL and had to have surgery. So we canceled our trip, which sort of sucked. But now we're just gonna take a long trip over Christmas break instead. So, it's not like just because we didn't get to go, it was not work related at all. Um, and so we definitely travel. We travel a lot. Um, and I really appreciate being able to do that. I also think that I can take my work with me. So last summer, we went to Montana for a family trip, and I planned a styled shoot at Glacier National Park, and it was freaking epic. Like, it was so amazing. We had such a blast. Um, when we're in Oregon next week, I might do another one. Um, it's it's something that I have an opportunity to sort of do in lots of places and really explore.
Yeah.
Um, Additionally, because we have a little bit of an office in Portland, Oregon, which is where my family still lives, I get to go out there a couple of times a year, and it's technically work. So, so that's also really fun.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing about running your own company and also doing something that you love is like vacation can be
Right.
vacation. It can be disconnecting. It can be,
Right.
and sometimes it's like it's just as fun to work on vacation. And I've done plenty of times where I actually enjoy, we used to do these family trips to Vermont every summer.
Mhm.
Well, actually, this is the only year we're not doing it. It's a family thing. And, I enjoy sitting on the dock early in the morning, catching up on emails.
Yep.
That to me doesn't feel like I'm chained to my desk. Like I
Yeah.
can never leave.
Yeah. I
And we
agree.
were just talking about before I came on about like how maternity leave like doesn't exist.
Yeah.
At the same time, like I could complain and say like, oh, I can't take 5 months off and just enjoy. But at the same time, I like what I'm doing, and I get a lot of flexibility 24/7
Yeah.
that people who then have to go back to work don't get. So
Mhm.
that balance it's good when you're doing something that you love. You don't have to like always feel like I have to take a vacation and completely disconnect.
Yeah. And
Obviously, when you can, it's nice.
for sure. And I find too, I mean, my husband and I went away for a couple days over the 4th of July. And we didn't bring our computers. Like, we were like, let's take a couple days, let's try to disconnect. But spent a lot of time talking about like business development and because we both run our own businesses,
Mhm.
where our businesses are going and how they're growing and how we can support one another in that business development, and where we need help and where we don't need help. And so even though you're away, I find that those are the spaces that I am most successful at sort of coming up with a long range plan.
Yeah.
Being able to take a couple days, and I like the wilderness, so like going to the mountains, um, and just sitting there, and like even if you're just like sitting at the top of a mountain for an hour making notes about what you're going to do for the next year, I always find that that's the best way for me to kind of like reset and plan moving forward.
Yeah. I think my husband is like terrified of long drives with me. Because every time we go somewhere, the whole drive there and back, I'm like, so, all right, time to hash out this new business idea. I don't think he really cares, but anyway,
I get it though.
yeah. It's been so good to catch up with you and chat and let people learn about you and some of the things you're working on. And I know we barely scratched the surface in terms of all the possibilities and the cool. I would love to go into more detail about like all the different kinds of things you're doing with couples and stuff.
Absolutely.
Um, but we'll have to save that for another time. If people want to get in touch with you, they want to learn more about this topic,
Mhm.
they want to get involved with your new project, what's
Yep.
the best way?
Um, so there's a lot of ways, but they can reach me through the Greater Good Events Instagram is probably the best way. Our Instagram is Greater Good. Oh my God, I actually don't know our Instagram. I'm
We'll
so
put the
sorry.
link.
We're
We'll put the link.
literally on. It's Greater Good _ events.
Got it.
That's definitely the best way. Just shoot me a message, and we'll get right back to you.
I think we need an episode on Instagram because I am like a passive personal user. But I love now that when I ask people the best way to get in touch, it's not website, it's not email. It's like everyone is saying Instagram. So clearly
Yeah,
I'm missing the boat on that one.
I like it because it feels like much more active. I will go into my email inbox in the morning, read through all of them, and then like slowly make my way through them. Whereas like with Instagram, I'm like, oh, I got a message.
I love it. Love it.
So
Well,
it's just more
thank you so
exciting.
much for taking the time. I hope that everyone will contact you and you'll make lots of new connections and people will learn a lot more about these topics by getting to know you. To those of you who have watched or either live or the recording, thank you so much for joining. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Event Hustlers, Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. Eastern. And so until the next time we see you, hustle hard. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen.